Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I apologize for my tardiness today, everybody. I woke up this morning to prep the show, realized I was out of coffee. For those who do not know me, I am a horrific coffee addict and will have a migraine in a couple of hours if I do not have some coffee. So I went out to get coffee and I got stuck in the damn snow. We in the Pacific Northwest have been absolutely battered by the weather as of the last week or so. So I do apologize, you guys. I came home and scrambled to get this set up as quickly as I possibly could. But we do have a fantastic show for everybody today. I hope everybody had a nice holiday season and a happy new year. And we have, as usual, some depressing stories, but also some somewhat heartwarming stories to talk about today. Wanted to start with the RP plugs per usual. You can go to realprogressives.org for information about our organization. Our Patreon is there if you'd like to support us. All of our content, articles, podcasts, etc. Make sure you're not missing out on any of the tremendous work that we do. Make sure you're subscribed to both of our YouTube channels, Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. For make sure you're not missing any of the content. Real Progressives is more the educational side, economics, this kind of thing. RPIA is a little bit more the political side, where you'll find my show and others. Macro and Cheese with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine. Make sure you're not missing out on that tremendous podcast. The Up and Up with Jody Newell, talking about activism. Another fantastic show, MMT Mondays with Jabari Morris, talking about modern monetary theory and economics. Don't miss any of our fantastic content. Go to realprogressives.org for more information or to contribute and support us. So I wanted to start today with a story. This is in the New York Times, and it's about the Pentagon's propensity to commit war crimes in Syria. And some of the mechanisms by which they justified them. Civilian deaths mounted as secret unit pounded ISIS. An American strike cell alarmed its partners as it raced to defeat the enemy. A single top-secret American strike cell launched tens of thousands of bombs and missiles against the Islamic State in Syria, but in the process of hammering a vicious enemy, the shadowy force sidestepped safeguards and repeatedly killed civilians, according to multiple current and former military and intelligence officials. The unit was called Talon Anvil, and it worked in 3 shifts around the clock between 2014 and 2019, pinpointing targets for the United States' formidable air power to hit. Convoys, car bombs, command centers, and squads of enemy fighters. But people who worked with the strike cell say in the rush to destroy enemies, it circumvented rules imposed to protect non-combatants and alarmed its partners in the military and the CIA by killing people who had no role in the conflict. Farmers trying to harvest, children in the street, families fleeing fighting, and villagers sheltering in buildings. By the way, when you piss off the military and the CIA by killing civilians, you know you are going way, way too far. Talon Anvil was small, at times fewer than 20 people operating from anonymous rooms cluttered with flat screens, but it played an outsized role in the 112,000 bombs and missiles launched against the Islamic State, in part because it embraced a loose interpretation of the military's rules of engagement. So I encourage you guys to read that whole piece if you're interested, but essentially what it boils down to is they have realized that they cannot often justify offensive strikes. It's harder to justify an offensive strike. So what they do is they simply say that everything is defensive. They claim self-defense when they're an occupying force. We do the same thing all over the world. So in order to justify these strikes, they claim some imminent threat, and then the rules of engagement are significantly looser. The other thing that came out in this piece is that they were essentially instructed to look for an excuse to bomb. So this wasn't intelligence in the sense that we're actually trying to get the correct answer and then act appropriately. It was much more like, we're going to use this group to come up with a justification and an excuse to continue these bombs. And children, civilians, I mean, the most horrific deaths imaginable, right? This is nothing new to the United States military. We've covered ad nauseum the war crimes that we commit all around the world, and the military-industrial complex, and the geopolitical incentives for all of this stuff. Our support for the Saudis' genocide in Yemen, which, by the way, they just killed a few days ago. The Saudis killed like some of their own supporters on accident. They killed like a dozen rebels who were pro-Yemeni government. It's a mess. It's a fucking mess. We just go bomb people and kill people, and Raytheon gets to rake in the profits, right? But this revelation that the Pentagon was behaving so openly recklessly, so openly loose about the rules of engagement, so explicitly instructing people to look for an excuse to drop these bombs, as opposed to instructing these groups to look for accurate intelligence, is quite revelatory. And again, it's not surprising to anybody who pays attention to this stuff, and I'm sure most of my audience is hardly stunned to see this, but this kind of reporting is important. And we need to keep up on holding the Pentagon to some form of account, and the military contractors. The Pentagon's almost in many senses a puppet for the military contractors and the private mercenaries that they contract out and things like this. But this is hardly surprising. The whole Syria situation also a total mess, because we have long supported both sides of that civil war. At one point, it was revealed that the Pentagon and intelligence community were supporting opposite sides of this conflict. In other words, just throwing gasoline on the fire and making it worse from all possible angles. One of the first things the Biden administration did foreign policy-wise was to bomb a building in Syria that supposedly had Iraqi operatives. This has been a messy situation in Syria for a very long time. And it's hardly surprising to see that our conduct here amounted to such explicit and egregious war crimes. But we need to continue to hold the Pentagon to account. Another less than pleasant story here. I'm sure some of you have followed how the LAPD has been on somewhat of a killing spree as of late, I guess you could say. Shot 9 people in 5 days. And by the way, this article was 2 days ago. They shot someone else yesterday. It's 5 LAPD killings in 9 days. So make it, 6 in 10? Teens death caps brutal year of police shootings. The killing of Valentina Oriana Peralta, a 14-year-old who died in her mother's arms after police shot her in a department store dressing room, has sparked outrage and renewed scrutiny of the Los Angeles Police Department. By the way, that this is framed as renewed scrutiny instead of continued scrutiny is part of the fucking problem. Yet her death was just one of 5 killings by LAPD in a 9-day period this month, marking a brutal end to a year that has seen repeated scandals inside one of America's largest police departments. This year, the LAPD killed more than double the number of civilians than in 2020. And while it's unclear what's driving the increase, activists argue that LAPD officers have been emboldened to use lethal force in careless and unwarranted ways after seeing their colleagues face little, if any, repercussions. Quote, the tactic is shooting first and asking questions later, said Jose Barrera, California director for the League of United Latin American Citizens. During the past week and a half, LAPD shot 6 people, including Oriana Peralta. 5 of the people shot by LAPD around the Christmas holiday have died, and none were armed with guns, according to official accounts. Not one of them was armed. Not one. That's insane. The killings added to an already grim year for the LAPD's use of lethal force. In 2021, LAPD has shot 38 people, killing 18 of them, according to the LA Times. In 2020, the department shot 27 people, killing 7 of them. Those figures were similar to 2019, when LAPD shot 26, killing 12. So these numbers just keep going up, you guys. I mean, every single number keeps going up. They're shooting more people and killing more people every year. This is the effect of the reforms from the Obama administration? This is the effect of electing Joe Biden president? Quote, there's just a reckless disregard for human life, said Christian Contreras, a local civil rights attorney representing the family of one of the civilians killed by the department this month. We're dealing with a huge surge in police shootings and killings of Black and brown people. It's out of control. The shootings, and particularly the death of the teenage bystander, have brought national attention to the department, which has faced continued accusations of unjustified killings, racial profiling, and civil rights violations. In most instances, police have released few details about the people they killed and why police resorted to deadly force. But even with the limited information available, critics say the circumstances do not indicate deadly force was merited. On the 18th of December, LAPD officers fatally shot 2 people in separate incidents, both involving men allegedly holding knives. In the first incident, LAPD said officers in the Newton Division in South Central were responding to a call for a domestic violence suspect at an apartment complex described as a man in his 30s. Spokesperson said that officers upon arrival found Rosendo Olivio Jr., 34 years old. Police alleged Olivia was holding a folding knife and butane lighter and yelling profanities and threats, and that an officer shot him dead when he ignored commands. It's you get the death penalty for not listening to a police officer in this country. Notice they didn't even try to say shot dead because he was threatening somebody else's life. Notice they didn't even try to say that he was threatening. They said he was behaving erratically and disobeying commands. So disobeying police gets you fucking murdered in this country. But Contreras, an attorney representing Olivia's family, said it was unclear if Olivia was the suspect related to the original call, and that his family has questioned whether he was involved. Holding a pocket knife was not justification for killing him, Contreras added. No shit. And also not uncommon for them to kill someone who wasn't even part of the original call or the original reason that they were present. Not uncommon at all. Just look at Breonna Taylor. Olivia's shocked family struggled to process the news and the LAPD statements presenting their loved one as a violent criminal. That's what they always do, by the way. Once they murder somebody, they have to then justify it. So they turn around and publicly smear and denigrate the person that they've just murdered. It's one of the most disgusting, reprehensible, repulsive things that you will see in all of politics. The attorney said Olivia was a father of 4 who lived in a neighborhood where police have been embroiled in repeated scandals over the killings of civilians. Officers in the LAPD's Newton division have for years used the nickname Shootin' Newton. You got to be kidding me. They're glorifying this, you guys. They're glorifying this. They claim that they're there to stop thugs, but they're laughing about the fact that they're thugs. They're bragging about the fact that they're thugs. They're glorifying themselves for being thugs. And although the LA Police Commission ruled that police officers violated policy in 2 other recent LAPD killings in South LA, the officers have not faced charges. Quote, police investigate themselves and justify the conduct of their colleagues, said Contreras. The system is designed to cover up misconduct. Precisely correct. Precisely correct. The thin blue line is treated with higher regard by police than any form of integrity pertaining to any given investigation. They protect their own first and foremost, and that is incredibly obvious. This is also, unfortunately, anecdotal, as high as those numbers sound, right? When we say that LAPD killed 17 people this year and shot over 30 people this year, that sounds outrageous. That's just a drop in the bucket compared to the country, you guys. We kill 1,000 plus a year. For years, it was 12 or 1,300 a year that we were killing. And those numbers are all conservative and almost definitely low because there are a number of departments that refuse to participate in the federal reporting process. So those numbers are based upon data collected by the feds, and many departments, especially in smaller areas, simply refuse to participate even though Congress has instructed them to report any shootings and killings that they engage in. So and when you go compare, I'm sure my audience knows this, when you go compare those numbers to the rest of the world, it's a pretty stark picture that you get, isn't it? Countries, even like China has way more people than us, you guys. They kill like maybe 10 or 12 people in a year. They got like over 1 billion people. We kill 1,000 plus a year here. Okay, it's the scale with which these discrepancies operate on is outrageous. It's almost unbelievable. We need to defund and abolish police and start from scratch. And this is another one of those things. I could sit up here every week and cover numerous instances of this. You guys, this is, you'd have to be blind and willfully ignorant not to see what's going on here. And the Biden administration failing us greatly on this issue, as with almost all other issues, saying that he supported reforming the justice system. He has not taken one single step in that direction. It's been almost a year. Instead of holding police departments to any form of account, what he did is actually increase the federal subsidies that police departments receive. So, there's no progress on this issue at all, despite a couple of years of protests and demonstrations, despite the egregious nature of George Floyd's murder, despite the public, the attention that some of these murders have gotten, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and others. Despite that, we still have seen zero progress, because the Democrats are about symbolism, not real substantive change. They'll paint Black Lives Matter in chalk in the street while they continue letting their cops brutalize protesters and murder Black and brown people. So they'll give you the symbolism, right? They'll get up at a fucking press conference and say, you know, oh, we're distraught about this. This is thoughts and prayers to that person's family. What a horrible incident. This is tragic. And then they do nothing about it. No accountability. Let the officer off. No systemic change to the departments. No systemic change to the system as a whole. No criminal justice reform. Nothing. They don't give a fuck. If you refuse to act when you cannot pretend to care. Okay? We need to defund and abolish police, and this issue should have everyone at home as angry about it as I am. So to a slightly lighter topic, although no less, indicative of our dystopian society. This is tweeted by Gritty is the Way. Fantastic follow on Twitter at Gritty2022, 20202 for some reason. It's a good thing old Elon finished selling off all that Tesla stock the day before the biggest recall in his company's history. Nothing to see here, just a coincidence, I'm sure. Sorry, guys, just 1 second. There we go. So what you can see here is he's showing two articles. The first one says Elon Musk finished selling his Tesla stock. He could sell again soon. He basically sold a whole shitload of stock right before the new year. And the second article, Tesla to recall 475,000 cars in the US. So right before the biggest recall in the company's history, Elon goes and sells a whole bunch of stock. I'm sure there's nothing to see here, right? I'm sure Elon's doing that in the best interest of everybody, right? And then, by the way, they turned around and the Elon stands online were boasting about how because he had sold so much stock, he ended up actually having to pay some taxes. So then the Elon stands turned around and said, oh, the left's full of shit when they say Elon doesn't pay taxes. It's I don't quite understand, you guys. Like I can't think of another billionaire or like just generally wealthy individual who has like this weird groupie fan base like Elon does, like all these simps that are just, it's very, very, very weird. They're just like sycophantic for Elon Musk. I really genuinely cannot quite wrap my head around it. You don't see that for like Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett. You know, there's this very weird group of people who defend Daddy Elon at all costs. Elon here once again engaging in selfish, rapacious behavior. Hardly surprising. The man won Time Person of the Year despite his spending the pandemic raking in billions, using a worldwide crisis to opportunistically rake in billions, and then turning around and telling people who were surviving on crumbs that they don't deserve those crumbs, that they shouldn't get those crumbs, right? By the way, he also was sued this year for sexual harassment, and I think there was a racial issue at Tesla that he was sued for. He's been busted using sweatshop labor in China. He's also been accused of horrific labor practices in the United States. We covered a More Perfect Union video of that just a few weeks ago. Elon he's this weird character in that he tries to portray himself as like different than other billionaires. You know, I'm the one who really wants to progress humanity and this and that. And then anytime you actually look at his actions, it's like, no, you actually want to enhance your wealth, right? And then he'll do weird things like he sold all his houses, and then all the Elon stands are online like, no, see how humble he is. Like, listen, when I think of the word humble, what comes to mind is not selling your $100 million mansion. That's not humble. It's not like, if I had $100 million mansion to sell, what kind of lifestyle would I then be living after that, right? It's just odd to me, the dynamic that has surrounded Elon and the sort of weird sycophantic fan base that he seems to have acquired. It's very odd. But the point here is that these wealthy assholes can get away with whatever they want, right? They have inside information as a product of their position of authority and wealth and power, and then they use that information for their own gains with their investments. And then even still, even when it's so obvious that they're engaging in such selfish behavior, the media still turns around and deifies him and glorifies him, and his fan base still sits there and kisses his fucking feet. So it's odd. Even when he engages in this behavior, they even use the horrible behavior as some sort of excuse to praise the guy. So it's very odd to me how that dynamic has presented itself. But Elon here, hardly surprising. By the way, Tesla has like all sorts of horrible production issues too, which I was not aware of until recently. Apparently, when you buy a Tesla, like there's gonna be a bunch of things wrong with it, and people have had to like buy numerous Teslas to get one that's adequate. Like apparently, there's all sorts of production problems with Tesla. So perhaps this recall is an indication that he's cutting corners in other ways as well, which again would hardly be surprising. So I want to show you guys a clip here about the Iran negotiations, the negotiations about the Iran nuclear deal. This is Dr. Trita Parsi, who I was fortunate enough to have on the show a couple months ago. Dr. Parsi is a professor at Johns Hopkins, I want to say. I might have that wrong. I think he's at Johns Hopkins. He's also the co-founder and vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He went on Breaking Points to talk about the Iran negotiations. He's a foreign policy expert and talks quite a bit about the Middle East and these negotiations. So this is an update on how the United States may have been influenced by Israel into taking a weaker position on these negotiations. Dr. Trita Parsi will come back and discuss.
Developments between the U.S., Iran, and Israel over the potential re-entry into the Iranian nuclear deal. As always, great friend of our show, Dr. Trita Parsi, joining us to discuss. Dr. Parsi, thank you so much for coming back. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we've seen some new developments here, tensions between the United States and Israel. Let's put this up there on the screen in terms of squabbling over the Iranian nuclear deal and reentry. You said on our previous show, Rising, that the U.S. really did not have a long period of time in order to enter that deal. Biden has now almost been in office for nearly a year, and we still have seen lagging developments. What are the latest, and where do you think we are in terms of our ability to get back into the Iran nuclear deal?
So talks are continuing right now in Vienna, and they're apparently making enough progress to be able to continue the talks. But we are in a bad situation. It's become increasingly difficult with the new Iranian government coming in, which is much more hardline. Some key issues have proven to become even more difficult to resolve the longer the time has passed, because some of the sanctions relief that the Iranians are being promised will likely not have any effect economically on them, because even if sanctions are lifted, European companies are not likely to go into the nuclear deal until they know who the president is in the United States in 2025, because they're not in the mood of going back into the Iranian economy and then being kicked out again by U.S. sanctions. That's already happened twice, and it's been extremely costly for them. And all of this comes back to the fact that perhaps it would have been much better if Biden had just moved quickly during his first couple of weeks in office, if not during his first couple of days, and just go back into the deal and then settle these details later on once the U.S. had reestablished its membership in the JCPOA and reestablished its moral authority to be able to speak on this, because it was once again a member of it. But that partly did not happen because the Biden administration decided to see if they could instead move closer to Israel and some of the GCC states and create a united front with them instead of quickly moving back into the JCPOA itself.
Well, and that is, in fact, the subject of your latest piece at Responsible Statecraft. You write, Biden's efforts to appease Israel on Iran have failed on all fronts. It's not the nuclear deal that's the problem for Tel Aviv, but the very idea that Washington and Tehran would reach any detente at all.
Yes, because, I mean, this is what was so surprising with Biden's earlier strategy. The Biden team should have already learned that when it comes to this issue, thinking that there's a way of being able to square the circle in which the Israelis fear any agreement between the United States and Iran, partly because it will improve U.S.-Iran relations and the United States will shift its focus elsewhere and actually make it easier for the United States to leave the Middle East militarily, partly because they believe that they themselves will continue to have tensions with Iran, but now without the automatic support of the United States, that those issues are not easily overcome. And the United States essentially had to make up its own mind. Is it going to pursue its own interest in preventing a nuclear bomb in Iran, or is it going to be deferring to Israel and its desire to keep the United States in the Middle East militarily? And the fact that Biden chose to do this is surprising, because we've already gone down that path before during the Obama era, and we know exactly what the outcome would be.
Put this in the context of the recent Israeli visit to the UAE. This is being heralded as a big, geopolitical realignment. What does this mean for the U.S.? I mean, is the U.S. actually in a better position with this new kind of tripartite alliance against Iran?
Well, it's interesting. Both the Trump administration and the Biden administration has embraced the Abrams Accord and view it as a significant advancement of U.S. interest and stability in the region. I'm not convinced by that at all, to be frank with you, because if we continue to divide the region and create these different pacts, it will only actually increase the likelihood of a confrontation. Whereas there is an alternative. The alternative is actually happening in Iraq with the Baghdad dialogue, in which the Iraqis have managed to get the Iranians, the Saudis, the Emiratis, the Turks, and everyone else to come together to actually discuss and resolve their tensions diplomatically. And the fundamental difference here is one effort is about creating pacts in order to organize the region against another state. The other one in Baghdad is actually about resolving the problems for everyone. It's inclusive, and it's not targeting any particular state. That's the one I think the United States should be supporting much more, because it will make it much easier for the United States to leave the region militarily. Whereas the Abrams Accord partly is designed to keep the United States committed to the Middle East militarily.
Fantastic stuff there from Dr. Trita Parsi. So we have gone back on our promises on this, the deals with Iran, the JCPOA. We went back on our end of the agreement. And then when Iran proceeded to then say, well, then we're not going to hold up our end either, we pointed fingers and said they broke the deal. As Dr. Parsi mentioned, we have twice created a situation where political changes in the United States led to significant changes for European countries insofar as their ability to engage with Iran economically because of U.S. sanctions. So this whole situation is a mess of the United States creation. And that's not to say, by the way, you guys, like, there are very few countries in the world that I would consider good actors. Iran is not one of them. I'm not like sitting here defending the theocratic conservative government in Iran. Most certainly not. Okay. But the United States we have continually broken our end of these deals and made ourselves distrustful in the region. So the extent to which that has now caused these hurdles to re-enter the nuclear deal, that falls largely on us. And as Dr. Parsi mentioned there, it seems that Israel has been given undue influence here by the United States. It's very odd how we grovel to Israel despite their reliance on us. It is very odd how that works, isn't it? Now, of course, Israel is effectively the United States military base in the Middle East. So they have leverage in that sense too, but they are so reliant upon the United States for their defense and for their ethnic cleansing campaign in with the West Bank and Gaza that it's odd to me that in a situation like this, that is sort of, tangentially related to the whole situation, but is not actually about Israel. It's about the United States and Iran, that we allow Israel to have this kind of influence over our negotiation strategies and our positions as it pertains to the Iran nuclear deal. It's just very odd. And this is the political situation, I understand, also adds to the uncertainty because it was the Trump administration that violated the nuclear deal and implemented sanctions that we had agreed not to implement. So then Iran, of course, backed out of their end as well. And with with Biden and Harris polling so terribly, and with Trump likely running again, if you're another country that wants to trade with Iran and you're looking at the situation going, are there going to be sanctions again in like 2 or 3 years? You have to, that influences the extent to which you take these negotiations seriously and how much effort you put into these negotiations. Because if there isn't going to be much fruit to bear from them, if you're just going to find yourself back in the same situation again in a few years, it holds things up. It really does. So all sorts of mishandlings of this entire situation by the last number of administrations. I will say, as harsh as I am on Obama and the Obama administration, one of the very few good things that they did was that nuclear deal. That was one of the very few like actually decent things that the Obama administration did. And of course, we proceeded to go back on it immediately, and Biden has refused to engage in serious negotiations to get us back into that agreement. By the way, for those, this is a slight oversimplification, but if you don't know what the deal was to start with, it essentially was Iran can only use their nuclear capacity for energy. They cannot build nuclear weapons. And in return, all the United States has to do is give them back their own money effectively, and a bunch of sanctions that we had no business engaging in the first place. Sanctions, by the way, they're deadly, like sanctions that disallow medicine from getting to Iran and things like this. It should be internationally illegal, but the United States does it all the time. So we basically had to give back money we had taken, and in return, the Iranians would only use their nuclear capacities for energy purposes. And this was regulated and monitored by a third party. It was working. It was an effective deal. And then the United States went back on our end of it. So why would Iran trust us? Why would any other country in the region trust us? Why would any other country in the region look at this as a stable situation when it could just be a matter of a couple of years until things go back? And the Biden administration's tendency to grovel to Israel in this situation may have also caused them to take a weaker stance, and that it's just devolved from there. So this is an unfortunate situation. I don't want any country to have nukes. I don't, the United States included, obviously. I would, the world would be a better place if we did not have any nuclear bombs. But it looks as though that deal will probably not be re-entered anytime soon, certainly not in the capacity that it was previously. And Dr. Parsi does great work, by the way, you guys. If you don't follow the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, I'm much more consumed with domestic issues and economic issues than I am foreign policy issues. So I kind of rely on groups like the Quincy Institute to keep me informed on things going on around the world. I really encourage you to follow their work. They're really fantastic. So Dr. Trita Parsi, Quincy Institute, go follow them and keep up on international stories as well. So we've talked a number of times about Andrew Cuomo, and I think this story is so indicative of how the press operates and how power operates in this country that I keep kind of coming back to it. But he, as we've previously covered, I guess I'll start with maybe a little recap here. During the pandemic, he forced COVID positive patients to stay in nursing homes, possibly infecting tens of thousands of seniors, causing who knows how many thousands of deaths. Okay. He then lied about this and covered up what had actually happened. They were manipulating the numbers of COVID deaths in the state of New York, minimizing those. And all the while, Andrew Cuomo writing and by the way, he made cuts to public health infrastructure and public hospitals and things like that prior to the pandemic, which further crippled the health infrastructure in the state going into it. Anyway, he then, during this pandemic, he writes a book praising himself. It's a self-aggrandizing book about leadership and how he had done so well in handling this crisis. It then comes out, and by the way, you guys, I want to set the stage. I want to make sure everybody understands how bad things were in New York at this point. There were literally trucks on the street full of fucking bodies because COVID was hitting New York so hard. And while this is happening, instead of he and his staff working endlessly and tirelessly to try to fix or somehow remedy or improve the situation, instead what he was doing was having his staff help him write his book on public time, right? Like these are the governor's staff. So all sorts of ethical violations at play here, all sorts of distasteful decisions, and that kind of thing. For his book, he was given a $5.1 million advance. Now, of course, the book didn't sell at all, which is hilarious. But when you get a $5.1 million advance, you don't much care if it sells now, do you? Anyway, the latest update here, an ethics panel in a state ethics panel in New York has ordered him to give that money back. But the attorney general has now intervened, and it's a little bit complicated. So this is in the New York Times. Why the attorney general stalled the move to collect Cuomo's book profits. A state ethics panel said the former governor had to turn over an estimated $5.1 million in proceeds. Not so fast, the attorney general responded. After a succession of damaging body blows to his political career, public image, and reputation, former Governor Andrew Cuomo seemed to finally get some good news as the end of the year approached. The state attorney general's office indicated in a letter 2 weeks ago that it was unable to enforce an order by a state ethics panel to compel Mr. Cuomo to turn over the proceeds of his pandemic memoir, contending that there were procedural steps that the commission must take before any money could be recovered. The decision by the attorney general, Letitia James, has been seen not only as a victory for Mr. Cuomo, but as a rebuke to the panel. The Joint Commission on Public Ethics, a secretive and much criticized body responsible for upholding ethics in Albany. By the way, they frame that. Notice how they frame that. They frame it as though the panel is problematic. The ethics panel trying to hold Cuomo accountable is problematic. You guys, this wasn't a close vote. The vote was 12-1. That he should have to give this money back. This wasn't like a gray area. This wasn't like up in the air. For the New York Times to so openly play defense for such a horrendous human being as Andrew Cuomo is beyond egregious. And I'm hopeful that what Letitia James is doing is genuinely just procedural. I hope she means it when it's like all that needs to happen is the panel needs to take a couple of extra technical steps and then they can force him to hand that money back over. But you know, we inundate the powerful from any form of accountability, you guys. If you or I did that, if you or I was caught using public funds to write a book that we made $5.1 million off of that was bragging about something that we catastrophically failed at, we would have to give the money back. We would probably be criminally charged for what he did. Not only the nursing homes, how about sexual harassment and assault of his staff? I mean, and media members, by the way. Oh, and a cop. There was a female cop who he was into, so he demanded that she be assigned to him, stuff like that. If you or I did that, we would be in big time trouble. But Andrew Cuomo, because he's a fucking Cuomo, gets to just get off scot-free, no problem. He also will not be charged for some of those sexual harassment and assault allegations that came out just a couple days ago. So the Cuomos get to get away with whatever the fuck they want. His brother, too. His brother gets to commit, journalistic ethics violations that are egregious, beyond egregious, a degree that's hard to describe. Like you learn in journalism 101, you can't do the things that Chris Cuomo was doing at CNN. But he gets away scot-free. There's no punishment for it whatsoever. He's a multi-million. They're both multi-millionaires. They both have a lot of influence in D.C. among the powerful and the rich and elite. This is how things work. They are inundated from any sort of criticism or accountability. You and I are held to excessive criticism and accountability, right? Blame the powerless, inundate the powerful. That's what we have done as a society. So this is egregious on all sides. Like, it's not just a crime and a mistake and a fuck up. It's then the book just adds this whole other layer to it. This tells you who Andrew Cuomo is and what he cares about. He doesn't give a damn about your grandparent who died in a COVID ward in New York City. He doesn't give a fuck about him. What he cares about is his reputation and his bank account. What do you think Chris Cuomo cares about? He cares about his reputation, his fame, his power, his leverage, right? We saw that with how he handled the whole situation with his brother, offering PR advice and telling him to sweep it under the rug. Using, by the way, using his sources to tip off his brother about future accusations. Who do these people care about? They care about their own, and that's it. Period. End of story. the most greedy, selfish, horrendous people among us, and we praise them and deify them and prop them up and give them a platform and let them live the highest possible lifestyle. This is the society that we have constructed. And the Cuomos are a prime example of how broken that construct actually is. Broken's the wrong word because it was designed this way, but you guys get what I'm saying, how problematic that construct really is. So Cuomo looks like he'll get away scot-free with the exception, of course, of losing his job, but that's hardly anything really. That's not punishment. That's not, he committed innumerable crimes and he's not going to sit in jail for a single day. He's not going to pay a single fine. He's not going to see a single day sitting at the defendant's table in court like the rest of us would. So this is the society we have built and now we're reaping what we have sown, and Chris and Andrew get to be the benefactors of that society. So another story here, you guys. This is about Ghislaine Maxwell. It's in The Guardian. Oh, can't scroll here. There we go. After her conviction, let's call Ghislaine Maxwell what she is, a sex trafficker, not a socialite. I was astounded by how many times I saw her described as a prominent socialite. For years, she was described as a socialite, a word that conceals more than it explains. Socialites are almost always women from a wealthy, if not aristocratic background, and their defining characteristic is being photographed with famous people. Ghislaine Maxwell fitted the bill, appearing in photos with everyone from Donald Trump to Elon Musk to Prince Andrew. But being a socialite is not a job, and it was unclear how she financed her opulent lifestyle, especially after the death of her father, Robert, who was quite wealthy. Over recent weeks during her trial on sex trafficking charges in a New York courtroom, the answer became clear. Maxwell's wealth came from her erstwhile boyfriend, the financier Jeffrey Epstein, who gave her at least $30.7 million over a period of 8 years. By all accounts, Maxwell went from being in love with him to discovering that her usefulness lay elsewhere and providing a steady stream of young girls to satisfy his depraved sexual appetite. The girls trusted her, thinking of her as an older sister, and only realized later that they had been betrayed. The socialite was actually a procurer, a word with deservedly unpleasant connotations. It does not sit easily with Maxwell's glamorous lifestyle, the planes, helicopters, and visits to Epstein's private island. Many well-known people will surely be regretting that they ever moved in the same circles as Maxwell and Epstein, and we're seeing that now, obviously, let alone appear in the aircraft logs revealed in court. Indeed, Maxwell's conviction last week on 5 charges seems to have created a kind of cognitive dissonance in some circles, as though such things simply should not happen to a woman with a degree of Balliol. I don't even know what that word fucking is. Well-connected individuals who rarely display an interest in American penal policy have complained bitterly about Maxwell's prison conditions, as though she is in a different class from other inmates. Assumptions about class are, of course, all over this case. Her siblings have rallied around insisting that they cannot accept the jury's guilty verdicts, although that seems to be more of an expression of denial than in any real expectation that she will win an appeal. We know from rape trials that the public imagination struggles to accommodate individuals who challenge stereotypes about sex offenders, whether it is the good-looking date who turns out to be a rapist or the socialite who facilitates a pedophile. It is easier to believe terrible things about Rosemary West, a dumpy working-class woman who helped lure girls into her husband's car and joined in his abuse of them, than an heiress who once rested her boot on the thigh of an entranced Boris Johnson. Fred and Rose West committed horrific crimes together, torturing their victims as well as killing them, but Fred West was already a murderer when he chose 15-year-old Rosemary Letts, who had a horrendous history of childhood sexual abuse, as his accomplice. Predators have a sixth sense when it comes to choosing co-conspirators. Maxwell was a grown woman when she met Epstein and fully responsible for the choices she would go on to make, but it is striking that their relationship seems to have begun around the time of her father's fatal fall from the yacht he named after her, the Lady Ghislaine. It is no excuse to say that the discovery that her father was a fraudster so soon after his death would have shaken Maxwell to her foundations, but it may be that Epstein recognized her weaknesses, seized his chance, and got access to an address book that included the Queen's favorite son, the Duke of York. Maxwell's connections boosted his sense of impunity, which is perhaps the single most important factor in allowing predators to get away with their crimes. This is the aspect I am fascinated by, you guys, and this is what I've talked ad nauseum about. He would later describe Maxwell in humiliating terms as an ex-girlfriend who had fallen on hard times, framing himself as the benefactor who had allowed her to live in the style to which she had become accustomed. Oh, he's the good guy, right? How sympathetic. The mystery surrounding the source of Epstein's wealth has led to comparisons with Jay Gatsby, the enigmatic main character in Scott Fitzgerald's novel, but such mythologizing lends a spurious glamour to sordid crimes. It is a depressing fact that women who identify with powerful men often share their misogyny and reflect it back in a desperate quest for approval. Profiles of Epstein remarked on the disturbing fact that his homes were full of teenage girls. They're nothing, these girls, Maxwell once told a confidant. They are trash. Imagine the attitude there. So Ghislaine was found guilty on 5 of 6 charges, and that in and of itself is somewhat of a rarity. The article was kind of going into some of why we typically see, no accountability for these people. Of course, Epstein's death brought about this trial in many ways. I'm not sure that Ghislaine would have been charged otherwise, or that this would have gone how it went otherwise, I should say. The part that's disturbing to me here, you guys, she deserves to rot in prison. She groomed children. She deserves to rot in prison. The part that bothers me about this, very much bothers me, is that we immediately, the judge, right off the bat, either pre-trial or at the beginning of the trial, essentially said that a lot of the evidence was out of bounds, could not be brought up in trial. And a lot of that evidence included what likely would have been the revelation of a number of powerful men who engaged in this, and who hung around Epstein, who kept company with these 2 pedophiles and criminals. So that part is bothersome. It's like they're using Ghislaine as like, let's throw a pound of flesh, let's give them something to celebrate that she's been convicted, in order to deflect away from the people she was serving with her crimes, right? Who was she grooming those girls for? Undoubtedly not just Epstein. And, obviously, Jeffrey Epstein's death, very suspicious circumstances, very difficult to imagine that he actually killed himself. But regardless of that, the important thing is that this information comes out, and it's pretty clear that it's not going to. This trial was perhaps an opportunity for some of it to come out, and that is pretty obviously not going to happen. So the one avenue that I could see going forward is that Ghislaine may, for some reason, decide to spill the beans. I mean, if you're just going to be stuck in prison the rest of your life or for a long period of time, you may realize that you can draw attention to yourself or gain leverage with powerful people if you either threaten to or actually do spill the beans. So it's possible that by convicting her, they've actually forced her hand, where like the only leverage play that she has left is to threaten powerful people with the revelation of their secrets. I could see that potentially happening. I'm not naive enough to expect any more information to come out here, but that is the avenue by which I hope some information may come out about the individuals involved, even if it's not in a court of law. Just to put these people on record would be a step in the right direction. So, and we know a lot of them, you guys. We know the Clintons, we know the Trumps, Dershowitz, Prince Andrew, right? Kevin Spacey, all sorts of people. All sorts of people. I mean, I played a Chris Hedges clip where he listed a whole bunch of them off: politicians, CEOs, celebrities, wealthy individuals, hedge fund managers, etc. So I would like to see those people revealed. And I would like to see some form of, even if it's just sort of social public accountability and not legal penal accountability, I would like to see some form of transparency and accountability for those who participated in these crimes with Epstein and Maxwell. So I unfortunately have a clip here to show you guys that is really, really, really bad. And I debated whether or not to do this segment. I genuinely did, because I almost don't even want to platform it, but I think I have to criticize it and call it out and put it in perspective. The media loves to do the horse race bullshit, don't they? So they're already talking about 2024. This is one of the, and I really don't say this lightly, you guys, I really don't. I try not to make things personal up here. This is one of the dumbest people I have ever seen talking in public. This is Chris Cillizza with CNN. And he is going over the New York Times. I think it was the Times. I might have that wrong. I think it was the Times that put out 11 potential 2024 candidates in the Democratic Party if Joe Biden does not run. So they're already doing the horse race bullshit, and that is egregious in and of itself, right? To draw leverage and capital away from other issues and use your influence to draw attention back to this horse race is in and of itself problematic. But what's embarrassing about this is how ridiculous the segment is and how out of touch these media elites are about politics in this country. Just for the record, in 2020, Chris Cillizza's picks included Kamala Harris #1. She didn't even make it to Iowa. To give him a tiny bit of credit, he had Joe Biden #2. But to be fair, the whole media infrastructure had to kick into gear to ensure that Biden won. So he had Kamala 1, Biden 2. Then he had Beto O'Rourke 3rd. Okay. I don't remember who was 4, maybe Elizabeth Warren. Then he had Cory Booker before Bernie Sanders. So this guy has no fucking idea what he's talking about, even when it comes to patently obvious rudimentary things. And yet this is an industry, by the way, you guys, political commentary. It's an industry where you can be wrong every time and continue to be treated as an expert and platformed by these big networks like CNN. So I apologize for forcing you all to watch this, but this is Chris Cillizza giving a secondhand embarrassment type of presentation about the 11 Democrats that he and the New York Times and the mainstream elite seem to think may have a chance to win in 2024.
Let's go through the 11 names floated by the Times as 2024 Democratic contenders and go through their strengths and their weaknesses. Kamala Harris. Asked by the Wall Street Journal recently whether she thought Joe Biden would be running again, the vice president said this, quote, "I'll be very honest, I don't think about it, nor have we talked about it," end quote. Which, well, that can't be true. While Harris has undoubtedly struggled as vice president, she's still the most likely Democrat not named Joe Biden to wind up as the party's nominee in 2024, thanks to not just her name identification advantage over the rest of the field, but also her demonstrated polling strength among black voters, a critical Democratic constituency. Pete Buttigieg, he, to me, seemed to be the most naturally talented candidate in the 2020 field. Mayor Pete, who is now the Secretary of Transportation, has also been front and center selling Joe Biden's infrastructure bill, a popular piece of legislation to have your name attached to. And yet, polling shows that problem with support in the all-important black community that plagued him in 2020 doesn't appear to have improved much, if at all. And that's a big problem. Elizabeth Warren. The Massachusetts senator is still popular among liberals and wouldn't be splitting the vote with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders this time around like she did in 2020, given that we don't expect Sanders to make a third run for president. But Warren hasn't expressed much interest in a return bid of her own and said earlier this year that she plans to run for re-election to the Senate in 2024. That said, her response about Biden to the Times, quote, "He's running, I expect to support him and help him get reelected. I'm sticking with that story," end quote, did raise some eyebrows raised. Amy Klobuchar. Other than Buttigieg, I thought the Minnesota senator came out of the 2020 campaign looking the best. And her Midwest roots are always a plus given what we expect the electoral map to be. Klobuchar campaigned in Virginia this year with former Governor Terry McAuliffe and is doing very little to knock down talk that she's interested in a re-run. Roy Cooper. Term limited out of office in 2024, the North Carolina governor has ample time to consider his next step, starting with his service as the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association in 2022. Hailing from what will likely be a swing state in the next presidential election could be a major argument in Cooper's favor. But it's a very open question as to someone with as moderate a governing record as Cooper could win a Democratic presidential primary. Mitch Landrieu. Landrieu is tasked with dispersing the hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure funds approved by Congress earlier this year. Being tasked with implementing the infrastructure bill is a big and high-profile job that the former New Orleans mayor has taken to with relish. Delicious on a hot dog. And it's a very good job to build goodwill with key Democratic constituencies, too. Going from that job to a White House run might seem like a stretch, but remember that Buttigieg's past experience prior to running in 2020 was as mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And New Orleans is a heck of a lot bigger in terms of population than South Bend. Gina Raimondo. So Raimondo made the leap from Rhode Island governor to Biden administration commerce secretary, but as with Roy Cooper, doubts remain as to whether she is too moderate to win a Democratic primary. She's also not all that well known. Gretchen Whitmer. The Michigan governor needs to win what could be a tough re-election race next year before she can turn to considering a national run in earnest. But if she does win in 2022, Whitmer will have a demonstrated appeal in what could be one of the swingiest states in 2024, a not insignificant feather in her cap. What happened to my cap? Phil Murphy. The record of New Jersey governors running for president isn't great of late. Sorry, Chris Christie. And Murphy did just win a second term by a much smaller margin than most analysts expected. The important thing, though, is that he won, and he can use the next few years of his governorship as a policy and political testing ground. J.B. Pritzker. Pritzker has two things going for him. One, he's the governor of a major Democratic Midwestern state, Illinois. And two, he's very, very rich. Like Whitmer, Pritzker needs to get reelected in 2022 before even considering 2024. But unlike Whitmer, Pritzker sits in a decidedly Democratic state and is a clear favorite. Stacey Abrams. So Abrams talked openly about running for president in 2020 before ultimately passing on the race. This time she needs to win the Georgia governor's mansion in 2022 before thinking too much about 2024. And that is not going to be an easy or cheap task.
Where do you even start with this one, you guys? I mean, honestly, the whole video I'm sitting here like frantically taking, that's wrong, that's ridiculous. So you come up with a list of 11 people for 2024 and like 6 or 7 of them nobody has ever even heard of. This is their idea of it's, where do you even start with this one? So he starts off with the Liz Bernie thing was what first caught my attention. He assumes Elizabeth Warren, notice he even like says it out loud. He assumes Elizabeth Warren is going to run, even though she said she's not, that she's going to run again for the Senate instead. So he assumes she'll run, at the same time assumes Bernie won't. Now, I'm not suggesting I think Bernie's going to run again, but just notice how automatic the establishment reflex is, right? To oh no, well, she won't have to deal with Bernie this time. You know, just outrageous, okay? Just outrageous. And then he says that Pete is the most talented politician of the bunch. Based on what? Based on being the most robotic? Based on sounding the most like Bill Clinton? What are you talking about? That, you know, just again, he just, you guys, they sit in a room, these establishment fucking media idiots, they sit in a room and smell their own farts and laugh and it's so insane. He's just taking what he hears from DC and regurgitating it as though it is reporting or media or commentary or original or in any other way worthy of people's fucking time. Then he says of Amy Klobuchar that he thought she came out the best from last cycle. What? She couldn't get any traction at all. All she ever did was humiliate herself with her pathetic attempt to make jokes about Donald Trump's hair. What are you even talking about? And then it came out that she didn't prosecute Chauvin when he was part of a previous murder. She could have saved George Floyd's life potentially by putting Chauvin in jail earlier or getting him off the force earlier. She refused to. When she was, by the way, Attorney General in Minnesota, before she was a senator. So anyway, that came out right after the election cycle. Chris Solis is like, yeah, no, she seems great. I thought she came out better than anybody. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? This is, you guys, this is why the media is such a laughing stock. This is why. And then he goes on to list like 6 names, and I'm like, who the fuck is that? I don't know. Roy Cooper. People in North Carolina don't know fucking Roy Cooper. Oh my God, it drives me so batshit. But this is the kind of stuff, you guys, that will get that will have been viewed millions and millions of times, and then people just assume that because it's CNN and Saliza and the New York Times that must be credible and that must really be what's going to happen. So it's this like, they speak it into existence and they start 2 years ahead of time. You know, there's nothing to back up his analysis there whatsoever. Nothing to back up the New York Times analysis there whatsoever. By the way, the New York Times, you know who they picked going into the primary last time to win the Democratic nomination? They picked Beto O'Rourke and Amy Klobuchar. Okay? Your credibility should be shot right there. Done. You know, no listening to you anymore, you fucking idiot. You It's the only industry, you guys, where you can just be wrong your entire career and continue to be treated like an expert and continue to be platformed on the New York Times or CNN. Professional wrong people are treated as experts in this fucking field. It's just beyond insane. And unfortunately, it really does create, to whatever extent, you guys, electoral politics could be valuable, to whatever extent it's a tool that we could utilize, that is crippled by this kind of media influence, and that people listen to people like Chris Cillizza, that people sitting at home think that all sounded reasonable. And this, by the way, this is why YouTube has to boost algorithms for CNN compared to other independent sources. I might get a few hundred views on this live stream. He got millions on that, I guarantee you. Not on YouTube, but between them showing it on the network and the hundreds of thousands I'm sure it got on YouTube and whatever else, it's that influences opinions. And then that leads to both the establishment mentality of we have to vote lesser evil. And it also, by the way, it leads to the complete and total sort of, I'm blanking on the word I'm looking for. Like the lefties just retreating from the whole process because they feel disenfranchised, right? When they see that garbage for 2 straight years going into an election, it starts to feel helpless. So the establishment gets to benefit on both sides of this. People participating in elections are convinced to vote lesser evil and to stick with the establishment and listen to the establishment sources. And people who may have otherwise voted for an outside candidate are often just turned off from electoral politics entirely. So they get to win on both fronts, right? So anyway, like I said, I debated covering that because I didn't even want to fucking platform that moron. But at the same time, it's worth pointing out how problematic that kind of garbage content is. And unfortunately how influential it can be. So, if you're listening to Chris Cillizza, go see a doctor. The guy has no fucking idea what he's talking about. And that is exactly why he gets to keep his job. That's not like a mistake on CNN's behalf. What they want is mouthpieces for power. They want people to get up there and play stenographer for the DC elite. And that is exactly what Chris Cillizza does. And you just saw it there. So anyhow, apologies for bringing you that horrendous clip, but I felt the need to explain how problematic it is. We have an update on the trucker in Colorado who was wrongly sentenced to 110 fucking years in prison for an accident where his brakes gave out. This accident was back in 2019. The update is a positive one, but not as positive as I would have hoped. This is in a local news, the Denver channel. Governor Polis grants clemency, reduces trucker's 110-year sentence to 10 years. So again, step in the right direction. He shouldn't face any time for this at all, obviously, okay? Governor Jared Polis on Thursday reduced the sentence of the semi-truck driver convicted of killing 4 people in the April 2019 explosive crash on Interstate 70. Polis granted clemency to Rogel Aguilera-Mederos, reducing his sentence from 110 years to only 10 years. They say only as though 10 years is not a lot to serve in prison. Jesus fucking Christ. The 26 years old, was given the 110-year sentence on December 13th. The judge who handed down the sentence was bound by the state's mandatory minimum sentencing rules. Guys, this tells you how broken our system is. Let's read this. In a statement, Leonard Martinez, later on is the part I was getting to, but I'll read through this. In a statement, Leonard Martinez, who is Aguilera-Mederos' attorney, said he was grateful for the governor's willingness to grant clemency in the case. Quote, the judge's sentence of 110 years is unjust, and not in line with prior case law, and we are thankful that the governor agrees with us, Martinez said in a statement. We are reviewing this commutation of the sentence with Rogel and his family. The potential for Rogel to be reunited with his family rather than spend a lifetime behind bars is exciting for all involved. First Judicial District Attorney Alexis King, whose office sought the original charges but then asked a judge to reconsider the sentence and modify it to 20 to 30 years, said in a statement she was disappointed in the governor's decision to act prematurely. She still wanted him in prison for 30 fucking years. That makes my blood boil. Quote, I join the surviving victims and families of those who lost their loved ones in their wish to have the trial judge determine an appropriate sentence in this case as he heard the facts and evidence of the defendant's destructive conduct that led to death, injury, and devastating destruction. By the way, it wasn't the defendant's conduct. It was the company's conduct. Let's just get that clear. We are meeting with the victims and their loved ones this evening to support them in navigating this unprecedented action. Oh my God. You guys, I'm not even going to continue the misframing that shitty attorney gave. I wanted to get to the quote here from the judge. Apologies, guys. I thought this was in this article. It might have been in a different one. I'll just paraphrase. The judge effectively said when he handed the sentence down that he had to give the mandatory minimum by law, but that he really didn't want to and didn't think the defendant deserved it. So when you have a judge sitting up there literally saying, this shitty system has handcuffed me into giving down a sentence that I don't believe is right, that should really tell you all you need to know. And by the way, I haven't heard one peep about holding the company accountable for their maintenance issues. Who's responsible for maintaining a truck? Okay. For someone to get 110 years for an accident is egregious in any circumstance, and I'm grateful that we have taken a step in the right direction, that he at least does not have to face his entire life behind bars, but obviously he should have that entire sentence commuted. And I hope that the governor will rethink the 10 years. You should not get 10 years for your breaks given out, guys. I have to sit up here and say this. It feels so insane and ridiculous. It almost feels like I'm patronizing my audience to say it. But obviously, you should not serve time in jail because of your breaks giving out. For fuck's sake. Just unbelievable. Truckers, by the way, you guys, really dangerous job. Really, really dangerous job. There are a lot of bad drivers out there. There are a lot of drivers out there that could give two shits about giving trucks their space. And so these truckers, it is one of the most dangerous things that we human beings do on a regular basis is put ourselves in a car on the road. One of the most dangerous things that we do. Truckers do it for a job. And they have to deal with drivers trying to get around them and cut in front of them and all this kind of stuff. It's a dangerous job. And then when something goes wrong, like his brakes go out, this is how truckers are treated. Outrageous, inhumane, egregious. I'm glad to see that sentence had 100 years shaved off of it, but he needs to be fully commuted. I don't know what else to say. This is, a 26-year-old had his brakes go out and he's going to serve a decade in prison, you guys. That's a broken fucking system is what that is. Or it's a system that was not designed to be humane or to be just or to find justice in any sense of the word. So I have another video here to show you guys. This was a very, very disturbing testimony here from, not testimony, but a video posted by an ER nurse who contracted COVID and how she was treated by her workplace in terms of them basically wanting her back. So this is the state of healthcare in this country right now. And for those who are not taking, for those who would rather prioritize getting back to normal than taking COVID seriously, I encourage you to watch this video. This is a short video posted by an ER nurse.
So I'm a nurse and I got COVID. I have been working in the COVID ICU throughout this pandemic, and not once did I ever get COVID from work. I got it from my kids. Anyways, so I tested 5 days after I started having symptoms because I thought it was just a normal cold. And sure enough, it was positive. So I call a workability line and the lady tells me that I need to quarantine for 10 days from the start of my symptoms. And that was 10 days ago, not from when I tested positive. So here we are, 10 days from when my symptoms started, 5 days from testing positive. The workability lady calls me today and she says, "How are you feeling? How are you doing?" So I tell her I'm sneezing constantly. I have a cough still. I'm just so tired. I get short of breath. I just don't really feel like myself. Just don't feel 100%. And then she proceeds to say, well, out of 100%, where would you put yourself? Well, ma'am, I would put myself at about 60%. I just don't really feel great. And she proceeds to say, well, are you having any fevers? I tell her no, but also I haven't really been checking them. I'm just going off of how I feel. She says, perfect. Well, you are clear to go back to work. You are good to go. Oh, okay. So back to work I can go when I'm still having all of these symptoms and I don't feel great. But I'm good to go. Oh, and it gets better. She says, make sure you don't take another test before you proceed to go back to work because it will for sure be positive. Oh, and then she says, but that's okay. As long as you're not having fevers, you're good to go. So return to work, please. And that, my friends, is where healthcare is at right now. So, I don't even know what to say.
I don't even know what to say. You guys, they're telling her, we know you're positive, but don't go test because then you wouldn't be allowed to come back to work. Instead, just come back to work. She works in a fucking emergency room. This is where we're at right now with healthcare in this country. And there are a lot of factors that contribute to this. Our inaction on healthcare going back decades is a significant factor in this, that we don't have the infrastructure to deal with this crisis is all part of that. And then on top of it, there's this favoring big businesses incentives over human lives as it pertains to our response to the COVID pandemic that both administrations, the Trump and the Biden administration, have clearly prioritized the interests of big businesses in trying to get us back to normal as opposed to the interests of human beings. And by the way, you guys, I don't want to see, like, there are a lot of downsides that come with having to deal with this pandemic. Lockdowns are not good for people's mental health. I don't want to see us in lockdown. What the federal government should have done is made everybody economically whole. They have the power of the purse. They should have paid people to stay home right off the bat. We could have gone for an elimination strategy right off the bat and said, we are going to shut everything down. We're going to make people economically whole. And we're going to try to eradicate this virus, and then we'll get back to normal. At no point did we do that because we prioritized big business instead. And instead of prioritizing, for example, even though the mainstream talks a lot about vaccines, and I encourage my audience to get vaccinated and boosted. I have been vaccinated and boosted. They talk exclusively about the vaccine and no other strategy, and they grovel to big pharma and refuse to pass the TRIPS waiver. So even their purported strategy is not what they're actually matching with their actions. They're groveling to Pfizer and Moderna instead, who would like to make profits on all of the vaccines that are distributed throughout the world, instead of allowing generic versions of those vaccines to be made to be distributed to impoverished countries. So at every step here, you guys, we have prioritized the wealthy and the elite. We have prioritized the powerful. We have prioritized big business and big pharma and big insurance companies over the well-being of Americans, well-being of human beings. And actually, in this case, it goes well beyond Americans. A lot of times we're just talking about domestic policy. In this case, it actually goes worldwide. How many countries are suffering right now because we have refused to provide them access to these vaccines by refusing to pass the TRIPS waiver? I also just wanted to note, you guys, there are some like ripple effects to all of this that we might not intuitively think about right off the top of our heads. One of them that came to mind watching this video for me is how many nurses have children. She said right off the bat, I never got it at work, right? I'm sure there's very strict protocols about masking and sanitizing and all that kind of stuff. So even though she was working in the COVID ward at work, she didn't get it there because of the practices being, utilized. But she got it from her kids at home. So I want everybody who's using these talking points that, like, kids don't get very sick anyway. Why aren't we sending kids back to school faster? Why are we, trying to vaccinate kids? I want people who are using those narratives to consider that. You can bring the healthcare system to a halt. If all those kids end up passing COVID on to their parents, you know how many nurses have children? You know how many doctors have children? You know how many medical techs have children? So the ripple effects of all of these decisions are exponential when we're talking about a virus that spreads as quickly as this does. So the idea that we are now, like what, tomorrow in many places around the country, going to send kids back in the middle of an Omicron spike, you're going to see a lot more of that. And then to circle back to the main point, that our response to a nurse who is COVID positive is go ahead and come back into work. What do I even need to say about that? We're just saying, fuck the patients, fuck your coworkers, fuck anybody you interact with, and fuck anyone they interact with. Because don't forget, it's not just that she could spread it to somebody in the hospital, it's that then that person can go spread it to a bunch of other people. So I talked about this last show a couple of weeks ago. I have been so disappointed by the rhetoric surrounding COVID, that it has become a culture war instead of a scientific and medical issue, and that people have become entrenched in their position, even though we know, you guys, during a pandemic, you have to like respond to evolving data. You have to, but people just entrench themselves in their position, and it becomes a shit-slinging culture war. And that is really, really too bad. And that all these ingredients were thrown into the pot previously. The institutional distrust, which was created by the elites, right? That you don't trust big pharma, and that you don't trust the CDC and the FDA. Very natural and organic and reasonable position to take. And that's because we have had such shitty institutions for decades. You know, all of these ingredients that got thrown into a pot that have led to this clusterfuck of a response and narrative and rhetoric and all that surrounding this crisis. It's tragic. It's just tragic. I just want to encourage everybody to take this shit seriously, you guys. You don't know who that person standing next to you might interact with. They might interact with a grandparent. They might interact with an immunocompromised person. They might interact with someone who has a medical reason that they can't get the vaccine and therefore is more vulnerable. They may interact with a child who is not yet old enough to get the vaccine. So you cannot just take this like, well, you're vaccinated, so like you have the option to be vaccinated, so I'm just going to go back to normal. And if you choose not to be vaccinated, that's Darwinism, right? That doesn't apply to public health crises that spread quickly. Okay. Anyhow, that is all that I'll say about that. But I really want you all to keep this in mind and to try to be as careful as you can. You know, distance, wear a mask, just do right by the people around you. Do right by your neighbors, by your fellow community members, by your family, by your friends, and treat them with the respect of not, you know, exposing them and their loved ones and those who they interact with to this virus. Because just remember that domino effect, you guys. You're not just exposing the one person you're interacting with. You're exposing everyone they interact with, and they're exposing everyone you interact with. So I want to encourage everybody to take this seriously. Listen to that story from that ER nurse. This is what is happening to our healthcare system right now. It's being crippled. I shudder to think what we're going to see in the coming months. I really do. So devastating news about the healthcare system at the moment. And this is, lefties have been talking about this for decades, you guys, decades. Every aspect of the pandemic response could have been enhanced by a Medicare for All system. And this is another such result where we don't have the human infrastructure or the physical infrastructure to deal with a pandemic like this. So just terrifying stuff right there. So I do have an uplifting video here to show you guys pertaining to labor issues. And this was fantastic piece put together by More Perfect Union. I use their clips all the time. I'm sure my audience is familiar. If you're not, go look them up. More Perfect Union. Follow them on Twitter. They're putting out all sorts of great content pertaining to strikes and labor organizing and this kind of thing. This was their video sort of talking about how 2021 workers actually took back a little bit of leverage that they haven't seen in a very long time in the battle with management and ownership. So this was an encouraging and heartwarming, fantastic video from More Perfect Union. We'll watch it and come back and discuss.
These unprecedented times.
It's difficult times.
To all of our Amazon retail heroes.
The unsung heroes.
I want to say thank you.
Thank you.
We want to thank you.
The community stepped up and treated us like heroes. But management, they like to call us heroes, but they definitely don't treat us like such.
We feed all these families, but I can't feed mine.
Forced overtime causes divorces. It causes people to kill themselves that used to work here.
You are a number.
I'm hoping for change. I'm hoping for time with our children. I'm hoping for some more money.
During the pandemic, the stores were making a lot of money.
That success was built on us risking our lives every day.
I want to thank every Amazon employee because you guys paid for all this.
It is a sweatshop in there. They treat them like a gigabyte in a system. Even robots break down sometimes. We are here to stand up for the humanity of the Amazon worker and the humanity of workers across this country. This is just the beginning.
We're done giving up concession by concession. We're done being bullied by a company that makes millions and millions.
John Deere makes $6 billion a year. Well, guess what? My dad may have carried this in 1986. We're back. We're union strong. We've got the community behind us.
A wave of workers' strikes sweeping across America.
Picket lines popping up nationwide.
Right now, 800 nurses are on strike in Worcester.
In Alabama, over 1,000 mine workers are on strike.
And they gonna give us a good contract. We ain't gonna take no bullshit.
I'm so proud to be here today. It might be a little different for a Secretary of Labor coming out and staying on the picket line.
They're calling it Strike-tober.
Strikes giving.
We want the better pay, pension for everybody. It's not for only one group.
I mean, we're looking out for the guys who come next.
Attention Walmart shoppers and associates. My name is Beth from Electronics. I've been working at Walmart for almost 5 years, and I can say that everyone here is overworked and underpaid. This job, I quit.
People are quitting their jobs in droves in what's been dubbed the Great Resignation.
And we all know what happened in Alabama. They sparked the fuse.
We're going to bring the fight to Bezos again this year, Jeff. You're going to negotiate with us soon enough.
Massive win for those John Deere employees. They waited it out.
New hope tonight for New York City's struggling taxi drivers. Many have been on a 2-week hunger strike.
The first company-owned Starbucks to unionize.
For the first time in a long while, the balance of power is shifting away from big businesses.
We've been asked about how long we're willing to fight, and at the end of the day, it's going to be one day longer than they are.
That gives me goosebumps, you guys. That is so fucking fantastic. Love it. I love it so much. It's the one positive thing that I've been able to turn to almost every week on this show is some labor organizing that often is successful. Number of those strikes that they talked about ended in successes. We talked about Kellogg's, we talked about John Deere, etc. They got legitimate steps in the right direction in the contracts that were negotiated. So there is a tiny little piece of good news, you guys, and obviously the capitalists throw a shit fit whenever their leverage is cut into, even in the most tiny amount, right? Just this tiny little modicum of leverage is given to the workers, and they all wah! And that's also really hilarious and entertaining to see in its own way. So this is one thing that I'm encouraged by, and while everything in the deck is stacked against us, and I'm not naive enough not to see that, I want to be clear. But this is an area, you guys, where I see serious hope. And the reason I say that is all of the divisive, they try to divide us down culture war lines and conflict lines, right? They take 99% of the cake, and then they say, you all are left to fight for that tiny little piece that's left. And by the way, it's the immigrants' fault that you don't get a bigger piece. And it's, they try to divide us on racial lines and gender lines and all these, they try to play the culture war up, right? And labor organizing is one area where we can cut through that. People who may have different cultural beliefs and different lifestyles and this kind of thing can sincerely come together on a picket line and fight for each other, because like they said a couple times in that video, we're fighting for everybody. So this is an area where I sincerely see a little bit of hope. It is the many against the few, and so long as we don't allow them to sort of manufacture these divisions, I see some serious hope here. And the fact that Starbucks voted to unionize, you guys, the fact that Kellogg's, after they decided they were going to go hire scabs, actually had to go back on that they had to come out and take their branding off of products because the boycott was that effective. I mean, you guys, this is heartwarming stuff, sincerely. It doesn't sound like much maybe in the grand scheme of things, but again, I can't even list them all off, you guys. There were nurses on strike in Massachusetts that I covered. There were window washers in Minneapolis that went on strike that I covered. Kellogg's, Frito-Lay, John Deere, Starbucks, Amazon. I mean, I'm forgetting a ton of them. There were coal workers in the South who went on strike. There, again, I'm blanking on about HelloFresh, the meal prep, that delivers to your door. Those workers went on strike. I mean, on and on. Restaurant workers in New York went on strike. I'm blanking on, I'm sure, like half of them that I've covered, but you guys get the point. This is very universal. It's across industries, it's across regions, and we're seeing this leverage that workers have that they did not have as little as a year ago or 5 years ago. So that is genuinely encouraging, and I would like to see that fight continue. And I hope that some of these small successes will encourage others. I hope that Starbucks workers around the country are looking at what happened in New York and going, man, maybe we should unionize. You know, I hope that's happening all across the country. And by the way, you guys, this might sound super corny. If you go into a place like that, just mention it. You know, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? I mean, seriously, just say to the person at the register, hey, you know, there've been successful unionization efforts, right? Like, you guys might want to consider unionizing. You'll be treated better by management. You'll get better compensation, better workplace treatment. Just drop that little, you know, I mean, seriously, because I am encouraged by this movement, and I think it is somewhat universal. And that is one of the high points, one of the rare high points that I have seen over the last year and in you know, the pandemic as a whole. So this is More Perfect Union, does fantastic work. Go follow them. That video has given me some energy and some inspiration. It's a heartwarming thing to consider that we may actually be winning on some of these labor issues. So just really fantastic stuff there. And I wanted to quickly, you guys, give a little bit of a tribute to somebody who I, you know, look up to, and Desmond Tutu, who was a South African revolutionary, passed away. And I think it was a little over a week ago or something, but I didn't do a show last week. So one thing, and it reminds me a little bit of with MLK, we can talk about his work on race issues. We can't talk about his work on socialism, right? Like I'm talking about in the mainstream. They won't describe MLK as a socialist, even though one of the things he was fighting for was workers' rights, and he was a socialist, right? Kept company with communists, you know. So that gets like left out and whitewashed. And a similar thing, I think, has happened with Desmond Tutu's opposition to the Israeli ethnic cleansing campaign in Palestine. He was a staunch supporter of Palestinian rights. And that aspect got somewhat left out in the discussions about Desmond Tutu following his death. And before I show you guys this clip here of him talking about Palestine, he has one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I might not get it word for word, but it's something like, in instances of oppression, if you choose neutrality, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. And he goes on to say, if an elephant has its foot on a mouse's tail, and you say you're neutral, I don't think the mouse will appreciate your neutrality. And I think that's such a powerful metaphor for a lot of the issues that we face today. In these instances of oppression, and, you know, like even the labor issue we were just talking about, there's an elephant who has their foot on the tail of a mouse. And if you sit there and you say that you're neutral, you're very clearly taking the side of the elephant, right? So Desmond Tutu was a legend, and, you know, we've lost a lot of good ones. We just lost Betty White. Seems like a whole lot of fantastic people have unfortunately passed during this pandemic. But I wanted to show you guys this video of Desmond Tutu talking about Palestine, because I felt this was somewhat left out of the conversation.
Time, I mean, very much so. You said that what you saw in Israel, something that was quite akin to the situation in South Africa before freedom came to the black people of South Africa.
Well, in many instances, worse. It's actually quite distressing. For one thing, we didn't have a war that encroached so very seriously on the territory of other people. I mean, many of them told us that I used to get to my farm in 10, 20 minutes. Now it's 2-3 hours. And having homes demolished, the Israeli politicians are aware that they can get away with almost anything because the West is guilty. It feels guilty. It feels guilty about what they didn't do when the Holocaust happened, and they've given a kind of carte blanche. Now, if they are penitent, they ought to be the ones who pay the price of that penitence. But the price is being paid by the Palestinians. Part of my own concern for what is happening there is in fact not what is happening to the Palestinians, but it is what the Israelis are doing to themselves. I mean, when you go to those checkpoints and you see these young soldiers behaving abominably badly, they are not aware that when you carry out dehumanizing policies, whether you like it or not, quite inexorably, those policies dehumanize the perpetrator.
That was the sort of reaction in part that you had to your...
So just, a fantastic clip there from Desmond Tutu, and we lost a good one. And he's exactly right. It's this very weird dynamic where we are penitent in a sense about the Holocaust, and there's this sensitivity about criticizing Israel because of the Holocaust. And yet, who's paying the price for that? Is it those who didn't act during the Holocaust? No, it's Palestine. It's the Palestinians who pay the price for all of it. So I thought that was a profound point. And he also makes the point that those who engage in inhuman policies dehumanize themselves as well. And I also think, you guys, that sounds sort of, I don't know, new age, whatever. Like it sounds sort of, I don't know what the right word I'm looking for is, but I think there's a lot of reality to that. I really do. I think when you act to dehumanize others, you're actually dehumanizing yourself. And in fact, some Israeli negotiators over the decades have expressed that one of their concerns is that they might actually be losing their own country right now. Of course, unfortunately, the authorities in Israel don't seem to see that because they continue to engage in these horrendous campaigns, an ethnic cleansing campaign, illegal settlements and war crimes. So, and by the way, that has not stopped since the ceasefire. Just in case anybody is curious, obviously I might have my timeline a little bit mixed up, but last spring or summer-ish, we had a couple months where it got really, really bad. And then there were 2 supposed ceasefires that were met. I've seen reports periodically, every few days, it seems, there's another report that they're dropping bombs again in Gaza. And the illegal settlements have never stopped, by the way, regardless of whether or not a ceasefire was in place. The settlements never stopped. So all of these crimes against humanity continue, and they just suddenly are ignored because it is slightly less incendiary than it was for a couple of months previously. Naftali Bennett he's now been in office for half a year or something close to that, and has not really shown much of a change in policy from his predecessor Netanyahu. So, and by the way, Bennett's a terrifying character. I showed one of the first episodes that I did for Real Progress in Action was I showed a clip of it was years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, but Mehdi Hassan was interviewing Naftali Bennett, obviously before he was prime minister, but he was in politics. And Mehdi asked him, you seem to be taking the position for a little bit of background. Bennett was a settler. I mean, he was, as a soldier, he went and protected settlers, and he's proudly a Zionist. He supports the settler campaign. And Mehdi asked him, he said, you seem to kind of be turning to your religious text to justify your political actions. He said, are you a theocracy now? Does your religious text supersede your Supreme Court rulings? And Bennett just kind of refused to answer and gave this very flippant response that Mehdi should, if Mehdi wants to alter Bennett's behavior, he should rewrite the Bible effectively. So, some pretty terrifying and unhinged characteristics that Naftali Bennett embraces, and that's held true in his policy. He has certainly not stepped back from Netanyahu's positions much at all. So this is an issue that I hope continues to get attention, because it just seems like there are little flare-ups every few years. I don't mean to demean it at all, but you guys get what I'm saying. There are moments where the conflict increases, where it'll get attention for a few weeks or something, and then it's like the media just ignores it again, even though a lot of the conduct continues. It's just a little bit less constant. So I want everybody to know that these illegal settlements happen continually, regardless of the status of any given ceasefire. And that bombs are often still dropped on Gaza under the guise of self-defense. It's similar to the story we covered about the United States conduct in Syria earlier, where defense is used as a justification to sort of skip over what otherwise would be, requirements to engage. So you get looser rules of engagement if you claim that something is out of defense. And this is a trick the United States and Israel both like to use. When they are occupying forces, they will claim that their troops, which are occupying forces, are somehow acting out of self-defense, which is a paradox in and of itself. It's contradictory in and of itself. So I just wanted to draw some attention to Desmond Tutu's views on Palestine and his support for Palestinian rights, because I felt that was largely ignored by those who paid tribute to him, and obviously also a civil rights hero, a fighter for everybody, and he will be sorely missed. The world is a little bit worse off without Desmond Tutu. So, but I encourage everybody to, to support those who are the victims of injustice everywhere, as Desmond Tutu did, proudly standing by Palestinians, saying that he sees some similarities between Palestine and apartheid South Africa and all that. I encourage everybody to support anybody who is being oppressed and victimized by imperialists and this system that we've set up. So rest in peace to Desmond Tutu. We lost a good one. And with that, you guys, that's all that I have today. A little bit shorter show than usual. I've been busy over the holidays and whatnot. I apologize again for my tardiness today, you guys. Hopefully won't be stuck in the snow anytime soon again. And I want to close again with the Real Progressives plugs. Please visit realprogressives.org for all sorts of great articles, podcasts, content, etc. You can learn more about our organization and our goals and the activism and organizing we engage in there. You can also find our Patreon there if you would like to become a member. We very much appreciate it. We do all sorts of media and education and, like I said, outreach and organizing. So your contribution is very much appreciated if you are able. Make sure you don't miss any of our other podcasts. Tomorrow you can catch MMT Monday with Jabari Morris, Jody Newell's The Up and Up, and Macro and Cheese on Saturdays with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine. Also, if you didn't catch it, we did an RP Live just last week with Dr. Fadl Kaboub, who discussed inflation. It was a fantastic discussion. RP Live are occasional Zoom calls that we do. And, Fadl gave a presentation about inflation and then took questions from the audience. That is up on the Real Progress in Action YouTube channel. If you'd like to watch it, it was fantastic. Dr. Kaboub does great work. So with that, I will call it a stream. I hope everybody has a fantastic week. Happy late holidays to you all. I hope you had a nice holiday season. And I will see you next week at 2 Eastern on Sunday, as always.